What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. Imagine buying the perfect tiny home, putting it on the lot where it's going to be, and then waking up the next day to find out the entire house is gone. Well, that is the reality for quite a few people nowadays as more and more tiny homes are being stolen. So today we're going to talk about why this is happening. Make sure you watch to the end because I'm going to talk about specific things you can do to protect your tiny home and what to do if unfortunately you find that your tiny house has been stolen. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Let's get into it. Let's talk about these stolen tiny homes. Alright, welcome back. So today we're talking about tiny homes that are being stolen, but a specific type of tiny home that's being stolen. So we're going to talk about the different types of tiny homes, why this specific home is potentially being stolen, and we'll get into the details of the different thefts through this article that I found. So there's three different types of tiny homes. I'm considering tiny homes on wheels, one type, and then you have tiny house on foundation, and then you have your park model. I'm including park models in this because even though the sizes can vary, they're becoming a really big part of the industry, and I see them as continuing to sort of shape where things are going with the industry. But today we're talking about tiny homes on wheels because those are the ones that are being stolen. So the benefits of a tiny home on wheels, obviously, is that it's a smaller footprint. So you have traditionally smaller ones, 8.5 feet wide. You have less space that you're being taken up when you're putting it in your backyard or your friends or family members' backyard. They're movable. That's obviously the biggest draw. There's DIY opportunities for people to build their own tiny homes. And then it's essentially the origins of the movement, right? So you have more traditional builders that are going to be able to create these tiny homes for you, such as like Tumbleweed Tiny Homes and different places like that. The cons of tiny homes on wheels, which I think some people are starting to discover as we see more and more people sort of moving away from tiny homes on wheels, is the potential for higher costs because you have custom builders with smaller businesses and fewer builders over time, at least from what I'm seeing, as people move more towards like the modular prefab route with the ADUs becoming more popular. There's a financing piece, so you might find a little more difficulty financing a tiny house on wheels compared to a tiny house on foundation. And then there's insurance and ultimately the resale value, because there's more competition within the industry with newer models. It might be difficult for you to sell your tiny house on wheels. So the current issue, we've got tiny home thefts going on. It seems like there's more increasing over the past few months. I found this article on Realtor.com that talked about how tiny homes have become a big target for thieves who are stealing the entire house. Now, that's the reason why I wanted to make this video, because they're not just breaking into the tiny homes, they're taking the entire house. So I figured it was worth talking about. There's 4 specific cases that they talk about in the article. I'm going to go over them briefly and then talk about why it's happening. So there's one in Oklahoma. So there was a woman who had their tiny house stolen overnight. So they had it on land that they were building it, so it wasn't done yet. And they came onto the land that they had onto their property and they stole the tiny home overnight. Fortunately, it was caught on the neighbor's camera. From what I know, they still haven't found the tiny home. Next up are tiny house TikTokers. So it's an entire family of 5 that had their tiny house stolen while they were inside another location. They just unhooked it from their car with their dog inside, which is really, really awful. Fortunately, because their dog had a GPS tracker on them, they were able to locate the home. So that's a good story where like the home was taken, but they were able to find it. In Washington, there are 2 particular cases they talked about. One, which I thought was really interesting, was a tiny house being stolen from a storage facility, but there were security cameras at the facility, so they were able to catch them. They located the home later, which is awesome. And then there's unfortunately one where a 224 square foot tiny home on wheels was stolen, and they did not find it yet, and unfortunately left a single mom and their 2 kids homeless. So when we're talking about this, we want to talk about why it's happening. This is just my opinion. I personally think there's quite a few reasons why this is happening. I think the main thing is resale and the scams that we're seeing. So Facebook Marketplace is an option. You can go on Instagram, you can go on Craigslist. You can put a tiny house on the market. There's plenty of places where you can sell it. And to my knowledge, partially because the system, the market is, pretty unregulated industry-wise. I don't know if there's too much of a system in place for verifying whether or not a tiny home is stolen. And I don't know if someone who buys a tiny home is going to check whether or not that tiny home was previously or currently is registered to someone else. So that creates a system where you can sort of put a tiny house up on sale for Craigslist or whatever, drop the price down. Maybe it's like 10K or 15K if you stole it. You didn't pay anything for it. And then ultimately, potentially, there's fewer security measures being put in place by the tiny house owners themselves. And just in general, maybe there's just less knowledge of how to protect your tiny home. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about tiny home security. I found an article on Tumbleweed Tiny Homes, one of the largest manufacturers of tiny homes in the United States. They came up with 7 different ways for you to protect your tiny homes. I'm just going to go through all of them and then talk about what this might cost you, because I think that's a really important piece that I know a lot of you are concerned about, just an added cost. Okay, so first up is a hitch lock. So that's just like, the hitch is what connects your tiny home trailer to, like a car or something like that. So that hitch lock is important. That could potentially, like they did say that people can still detach it, right? They can still break that lock, but at least it provides an extra layer of protection, something else they have to get through before they can take your home. Blocking or locking your wheels, chaining your trailer to a permanent structure, GPS tracker, which worked for that family of TikTokers, security cameras in general. There's quite a few options for security cameras, smaller ones, larger ones that can be more discreet or hidden. And then your neighbors as well too, because there was a case where their neighbors, their tiny house community that they were in before, people that knew them were able to track down their home. And then insurance as well too. We're going to talk a little bit about what insurance covers, because not everyone's necessarily aware of tiny house insurance. So I looked at a couple things. I wanted to see what the cost would be if you did all of them, if you do just one. So if we're looking at securing a THO, which is again a tiny house on wheels, you can get a hitch lock and it will run you between $30 and $100. Security cameras, which could be $100. I don't think it makes sense to get super cheap security cameras, so I just looked in like the $100 price range. And then the GPS, which I found here on Amazon, it's a spot trace motion activation tracking device, $80. Actually, I found it on Cabela's. $80 on sale from $130, so that's an option too. So you can get GPS tracker. That seems like a really great option, probably one of the best ones, because in any of the other ones it could still be stolen, and the security camera just tells you who it is, but the GPS tells you where it is, and that's probably the biggest thing. When we're looking at tiny home insurance, there's not like a ton of options. So Mac Insurance is the only one that I know that specifically focuses on tiny homes. They were on the channel a few months ago. You can check them out if you want. But I found their sort of breakdown of the different types of coverage they offer. So their website's down at the bottom, tinyhouseinsurance.info. And they have 3 different options. So they can cover the entire structure. So you can actually get your entire tiny house replaced if it's damaged. They can insure up to $150K. So that's really great option. And you can do another option where they cover the contents. So covering the contents of what's inside your home is what we're all sort of familiar with. So like renter's insurance covers the inside of your home and valuables, and you come up with an amount, and then it protects you against that amount. Theft of contents, looks like they cover up to $3,000 for theft, so it's not great if you have tons of stuff in your home, but it's better than nothing. Going on trips, different liabilities. If your entire tiny house is stolen, then they've got 100% replacement cost, which I think is the most important thing to sort of consider here, as opposed to just replacing contents, or then coverage B, which replaces like solar panels and things like that. So that is an option. If you're currently in the market for a tiny home and you're considering it, I would say definitely reach out to either Mac Insurance or talk to your builder to see if they have a recommendation for an insurance provider. I would never suggest you buy a tiny house without getting insurance, especially now knowing that more of them are being targeted. Tiny home communities, this is not something they talked about in Tumbleweed's article, but it's something that I thought about. Like, one option for securing your tiny home is just putting it in a community. That we've got the 55 plus gated ones, just gated ones in general, security cameras, additional protection. You've got more neighbors around you, more people that you can like Tiny Tranquility. They talk about how like when people leave, they've got such a small community that other people are watching out for their house. You need that when your house is small enough to steal on its own, and apparently pretty quickly, or it doesn't take too much time for different thieves to take it. So definitely consider putting your tiny house in the community. But if you find yourself in a position where a tiny home has been stolen, for sure, file a police report, check with your neighbors, look at nearby security cameras. You never know, someone might have seen something even like up the road from where you live, and then post it on social media so that you can get more people out there looking for your tiny home and let you know if they spot it. So what do you think? For those of you who are considering buying tiny houses, have you thought about the security feature? It's something that I think about a lot. I think it's probably like the number one thing I would consider like before and after buying the tiny house, is just how are you going to keep yourself safe, your pets, your loved ones. So if you're currently living in a tiny house and you have already put security measures in place and you want to share it, definitely drop a comment. I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to come on the channel and talk about it, that would be awesome. So yeah, definitely drop a comment. And yeah, for the most part, I just I hope that the people who have lost their tiny homes definitely get them back. hopefully there could be more and more things put in place to sort of protect against this sort of thing. But unfortunately, theft of, you know, cars and break-ins and things are just going up in the US in general as well. So it's just, you know, just a tough time in that sense. But I appreciate you guys so much for watching. Again, drop comments, reach out, ask questions. Don't forget to think tiny, and I'll see you guys in the next one.